The law office felt as cold as the Greenwich winter air outside its double-paned windows. Sunlight, pale and thin, struggled to warm the polished mahogany of the conference table where Julian Croft's relatives had gathered. They sat in high-backed leather chairs, their expensive clothes a stark contrast to the undisguised greed in their eyes. The air was thick with a tense, impatient silence, broken only by the rustle of a legal document in the lawyer's hands and the occasional, poorly suppressed sigh from a nephew named Trent. He stared at the head of the table, his jaw tight, as if he could will the proceedings to move faster. The room was a monument to wealth and power, filled with people who believed it was their birthright, a legacy to be claimed and divided like spoils of war, with no thought for the man whose life had paid for it all. Seated slightly apart from the family, near the door, as if ready to leave at a moment's notice, was Clara May Holloway. At 62, her life was etched into the gentle lines on her face and the calloused skin of her hands, which now rested peacefully in her lap. She wore a simple, dark dress, immaculately clean, but worlds away from the designer labels surrounding her. She felt like an intruder in this sterile, high-stakes environment. She was not there for a share of the fortune. She was there out of a sense of duty, a final act of service to the man she had cared for over 35 years. She looked not at the lawyer or the impatient family, but at a framed photograph on the wall, a landscape of a calm sea, finding a small piece of serenity in the midst of the simmering avarice that filled the room. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Abernathy, cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. He adjusted his spectacles and began to read from the last will and testament of Julian Croft. His voice was a dry, dispassionate monotone as he listed a series of minor bequests, a vintage watch to a cousin, a small trust for a distant niece, token gestures that did little to satisfy the hungry expressions around the table. Trent shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming a silent, agitated rhythm on the polished wood. The preliminary distributions were mere appetizers, and the main course was yet to be served. Abernathy continued deliberately, each word meticulously pronounced, drawing out the suspense until he reached the final, most significant clause of the document. He paused, looking over his glasses at the assembled family, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then the words came, clean and precise. To Mrs. Clara May Holloway, Abernathy read, his voice steady. I bequeath 50% of my entire estate, including the primary residence in Greenwich and Connecticut, valued in excess of $80 million. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room, followed by a dead, ringing silence. It was Trent who broke it, leaping to his feet with such force that his chair scraped violently against the floor. "That's impossible!" he roared, his face contorted in a mask of disbelief and rage. "She's a servant." He was a sick old man, and she took advantage of him. His accusation hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at Clara May, whose only reaction was a slow widening of her eyes in pure, unadulterated shock. It's in moments like these you see a person's true character laid bare, and it's why sharing these stories is so important. So if you feel the same, subscribing truly helps us continue. The force of Trent's accusation seemed to physically push Clara May back into her chair. Her mind, which had been a calm sea just moments before, was now a swirling vortex of confusion and hurt. The word servant was not an insult to her. It was a fact, a role she had fulfilled with quiet pride for over 3 decades. But the other words, took advantage, landed like stones, shattering the fragile peace she had carried into this room. She felt the hostile stares of the family zero in on her, their eyes cold and calculating. They weren't just looking at a woman who had unexpectedly inherited a fortune. They were looking at a thief, a usurper who had stolen what they believed was rightfully theirs. In that moment, she was no longer Clara May Holloway. She was an obstacle to be removed, a problem to be solved. The shock was so profound it left no room for anger or defense. Her hands, which had rested so peacefully in her lap, now felt heavy and foreign. The calloused skin, a testament to a lifetime of labor, they now used as evidence against her. She thought of Julian, of his frail hand in hers during his last days, of the quiet trust in his eyes. How could they twist something so pure into something so ugly? The mahogany table felt miles long, separating her from a world of privilege and entitlement she had never sought to enter. She felt a deep, aching loneliness, the same kind she had often seen in Mr. Croft's eyes after his wife passed away, a solitude that no amount of money could ever fill. The sterile, air-conditioned room suddenly felt suffocating, and all she wanted was to be back in the familiar quiet of the Greenwich mansion. Her journey there had begun 35 years earlier, a lifetime away from this cold, accusatory room. She had arrived in Connecticut as a young woman, leaving behind the red clay and humid air of rural Alabama for the promise of a steady, respectable job. The Croft mansion, when she first saw it, was more intimidating than any place she had ever imagined. It stood on a hill like a stone fortress, its windows like vacant eyes looking down on the perfectly manicured lawns. She remembered her first day, her hands trembling as she polished a silver tea set in a dining room so vast and silent it felt like a cathedral. Mr. Croft was a formidable, distant figure then, a man of immense power who moved through the house like a shadow. His presence felt more than seen. In those early years, her life was a quiet routine of invisible work. She learned the specific way Mrs. Croft liked her linens folded, the precise temperature Mr. Croft preferred for his morning coffee, and the names of the countless important guests who flowed in and out of the house for lavish parties she would only ever hear from a distance. She was a silent observer of a life of immense wealth, a world of business deals discussed over brandy and cigars, of European vacations planned on a whim. She never felt envy, only a profound sense of otherness. Her world was one of service, of finding dignity in a job well done, of sending money back home to a family that could not fathom the scale of the world in which she worked. The first crack in the formal barrier between them appeared not with Julian, but with his wife, Eleanor. During a long illness, when trained nurses came and went, it was Clara May who remembered the specific herbal tea that soothed Eleanor's throat, a simple remedy her grandmother had taught her. She would brew it without being asked, her quiet presence a constant source of comfort when others were clinical and detached. Julian, a man who rarely noticed the details of his own home, noticed this. He never said thank you directly, but one evening, as she cleared the dinner trays, he paused and simply said, "She appreciates you, Clara May." It was the first time he had used her name with a tone of genuine recognition, and it was a moment she never forgot. After Eleanor's death, the mansion's silence became permanent and heavy. The parties stopped, the guests dwindled, and the house transformed from a symbol of power into a mausoleum of memory. Julian Croft, the titan of industry, became a ghost haunting his own life, lost in a sea of grief. It was during this time that Clara May's role began to subtly shift. She was no longer just the housekeeper. She was the sole guardian of the home's rhythm, the only constant in his upended world. She ensured the fires were lit, that his favorite meals were prepared even when he had no appetite, and that the photograph of his wife on the mantel was always free of dust. Her unwavering presence was a quiet anchor in the storm of his sorrow. Then came Julian's own diagnosis, and the world shrank to the confines of his master's suite, which was slowly converted into a hospital room. The remaining family members, who had been distant satellites for years, began to circle closer. Their visits were brief, their questions about his health always followed by thinly veiled inquiries about his affairs. Clara May saw the pain in Julian's eyes as he endured their hollow performances of concern. She was the one who was there day and night, adjusting his pillows, reading him the news, and listening as he spoke of his regrets. It's hard to watch a good person be treated so poorly by those who should love them most. And sharing these stories feels like a small way to honor their truth. If you agree, subscribing to our channel helps us ensure these voices are heard. One snowy afternoon, as he stared out the large window at the white-blanketed garden, Julian spoke in a voice that was barely a whisper. "They see a vault. Clara, not a man," he said, his gaze fixed on the distance. "They're just waiting for the key." Clara May, who was fluffing his pillow, simply paused and replied, "I see you, Mr. Croft. Just you." He turned his head slowly, and for a long moment he looked at her, his eyes clear and filled with a profound, weary understanding. In that shared glance, the 35 years of service and loyalty crystallized into something deeper, a bond of trust and affection that transcended the titles of employer and employee. It was a silent acknowledgement that she was the only one who saw the man, not the fortune. In his final months, he began to share more of himself with her. He spoke of his childhood, of the ruthless ambition that drove him to build his empire, and of the personal cost of that success. He confessed that in his pursuit of wealth, he had neglected the very relationships that should have mattered most. Clara May would sit by his bedside for hours, listening without judgment, her presence a quiet absolution. She was no longer just a caregiver. She had become his confidant, the keeper of his life's final chapter. This responsibility was a heavy one, and it sparked a deep, internal fear in her. Sometimes, when a story brings you face to face with such a powerful emotion, it changes how you see things, and if this is one of those moments for you, joining our community by subscribing can help you find more like it. Her fear was not of the family or the future, but of failing him. She worried constantly that she wasn't doing enough, that she couldn't provide the comfort he truly needed. The weight of his trust felt immense. She would lie awake at night, replaying the day's events, wondering if she should have read another chapter from his favorite book or found a different way to ease his pain. It was a quiet, internal battle fought in the silent halls of the great mansion. She was determined to ensure his last days were filled with as much dignity and peace as she could possibly provide, seeing it as the ultimate expression of her long and loyal service. This duty became her singular focus, the center of her universe. The family's visits were a stark and painful contrast to the quiet intimacy she shared with Julian. Trent, in particular, would stride into the room, talking loudly on his phone about market fluctuations before offering a perfunctory, "How are you feeling, Uncle Julian?" He never waited for a real answer. His eyes would dart around the room, assessing the value of the art on the walls, his mind clearly on the inheritance. These brief, transactional appearances were like sharp intrusions of a cold, outside world. Julian would often just close his eyes until they left, a silent dismissal that was far more potent than any angry words he could have mustered. Sitting there in the lawyer's office, under the barrage of hostile glares, Clara May finally understood the full meaning of Julian's final act. This inheritance wasn't a sudden, senile impulse. It was a meticulously planned statement, a final testament not of his wealth, but of his values. It was his way of protecting her, of honoring the one person who had given him a lifetime of unwavering devotion when his own blood had offered only avarice. The $80 million was not a prize. It was a shield, a fortress built to defend the memory of their bond against the greed that now filled the room. The shock began to recede, replaced by a deep, quiet resolve. She would not let them tarnish his final wish. The courtroom air was stale and heavy, thick with the self-assurance of Trent's legal team. Their lead attorney, a man with a predatory smile and perfectly tailored suit, had just concluded his argument, painting a vivid picture of a lonely, confused old man being manipulated by a cunning opportunist. His words hung in the air, poisoning the perception of every quiet act of kindness Clara May had ever performed. She sat at her table, small and still, feeling the weight of dozens of judgmental eyes. Trent, seated behind his lawyer, wore a look of smug certainty, already mentally spending the money he believed was his. The judge looked down at his notes, his expression unreadable but weary. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, Clara May believed them. She felt the shame and humiliation they wanted her to feel, a crushing wave of doubt that threatened to drown her quiet dignity completely. Just as the judge prepared to speak, Clara May's lawyer, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Davies, rose slowly to his feet. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but clear, cutting through the thick tension. "We have one final piece of evidence to present." Trent's lawyer scoffed, an audible sound of derision, but Mr. Davies was undeterred. He held up a small, sleek tablet. In his final months, Mr. Croft kept a private video diary. He left specific instructions for this recording to be shown only in the event that his final wishes were contested in this manner. A ripple of surprise went through the courtroom. Trent's face lost its confident smirk, replaced by a flicker of genuine apprehension. The judge, his interest piqued, leaned forward and nodded sternly. "Proceed." "Counselor." The silence that followed was absolute as a large screen was wheeled to the front of the room. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly Julian Croft filled the courtroom. He was propped up in his bed, looking frail but with an undeniable clarity in his eyes. The light from the window behind him cast a soft glow, illuminating the familiar master suite that had been his final world. His voice, though weak, was steady and resolute as it echoed from the speakers. "If you are watching this," he began, "it means the vultures have descended exactly as I knew they would." He looked directly into the camera, as if staring down each one of his relatives. "For years, I watched them circle. I saw the greed in their eyes during every hollow visit, felt the impatience in every empty question about my health. They were not visiting a dying man, they were inspecting an asset." Trent visibly flinched, his face turning a blotchy red as his uncle's words, spoken from beyond the grave, stripped away his pretense for all to see. Then Julian's expression softened, the hard lines around his eyes easing as he spoke of Clara May. "But there was one person who never saw an asset," he continued, his voice cracking with an emotion he had so rarely shown in life. "Clara May Holloway saw a man. She saw my loneliness after Eleanor passed. She brought me tea when I couldn't sleep and read to me when my eyes grew too tired. She listened to my regrets. She gave me her life, her unwavering loyalty, without ever asking for a single thing in return. She was my confidant, my friend, my family. She was the only treasure my money could never buy." Tears began to stream silently down Clara May's face, not of sorrow, but of a profound, overwhelming relief. It was his truth, spoken in his own voice, a shield against all the lies. He took a deep breath, gathering his strength for his final statement. "This is why I have left half of my estate to her. Let me be perfectly clear, so that even the most avaricious mind can understand," he said, his gaze hardening once more. "This is not an inheritance. It is a restitution. It is a payment, long overdue, for a lifetime of devotion that my own blood relatives could not be bothered to offer. Clara May Holloway gave me the dignity of a peaceful end, and I am simply giving her the security she never had and so richly deserves." The video ended, plunging the screen into darkness. The courtroom was utterly still, the silence broken only by a quiet sob from Clara May. The judge, visibly moved, cleared his throat, picked up his gavel and brought it down with a single, decisive crack. "This case is dismissed." The aftermath was not a celebration. As Clara May walked out of the courthouse, she was met with a chaotic swarm of reporters shouting questions, their cameras flashing like blinding lightning strikes. She simply lowered her head and continued walking, guided by Mr. Davies, her expression not one of triumph, but of solemn relief. Across the marble entryway, she saw Trent and the others, their faces pale with a mixture of shock and public humiliation. Their greed had been laid bare for the world to see, and the defeat was absolute. Clara May felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a profound sadness for the family Julian had wished for, but never truly had. She did not want the fortune for its own sake. She wanted only to honor the man who had entrusted his final, most powerful statement to her. Her victory was not in winning the money, but in protecting the integrity of his last wish. Returning to the Greenwich mansion was a surreal experience. The heavy oak doors that she had opened and closed thousands of times as an employee now opened for her as its owner. The silence within was different now, heavier with the weight of responsibility. She walked through the grand, empty rooms, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. She saw not the priceless art or the antique furniture, but the ghosts of loneliness that lingered in every corner. It was in the vast, silent dining room that Julian's words came back to her, his quiet confessions about a life surrounded by everything but lacking the one thing that mattered: genuine human connection. In that moment, her path became clear. This house was not meant to be her private palace. It was a testament to a problem, and now it would become the solution. Within a year, the transformation was complete. The cold, imposing mansion was reborn as the Croft Holloway Foundation, a vibrant and welcoming home for elderly individuals who had nowhere else to go. The formal sitting rooms, once reserved for business dealings, now buzzed with the gentle chatter of new friends playing cards and sharing stories. The perfectly manicured lawns, once just for show, were now filled with residents tending to a community garden. Clara May was not a distant president residing in an office. She was its heart. She moved into the modest housekeeper's quarters she had occupied for decades and spent her days alongside the staff, serving meals, reading to those with failing eyesight, and offering the same quiet, unwavering kindness she had once given exclusively to Julian Croft. The house was finally filled with the life and warmth it had always lacked. Julian's true inheritance was never the $80 million. It was the legacy of compassion that now flourished within those walls. His final act had not just secured a future for one loyal friend, but had planted a seed of kindness that would grow to shelter hundreds. Clara May, now in her late 60s, found her ultimate purpose not in wealth, but in service. She had turned a monument to solitude into a sanctuary of community, proving that the greatest value lies not in what one accumulates, but in what one gives away. Seeing a story like this unfold reminds us that goodness can create ripples we never expect, which is why we feel it's so important to keep sharing them. If you feel that way too, subscribing is the most meaningful way to help us continue this work.